in a more civilized way. Now, what do I mean? I preach sometimes, and I don't think I'm preaching to anybody here that's doing this kind of thing. But I preach sometimes on, like, what's going on, or we're just letting our guard down, and we're just being foolish. I preach against the prom. I still do. Sorry. Why? Because I had a young man come to me, and he said to me, "I'm glad you preached against the prom." I said, "I am too, but tell me your story." He said, "When I was in prom, we all knew that if we took a girl out and we did show her a good time, then we'd get some good times too." And so what he was saying is, everybody knows it's wrong. And I would preach against it, and I would have parents come to me, legalists, and they say, "Leave it alone." I remember preaching on alcohol, and I had a youth pastor come to me in Maryland who was a 40-some-year-old man. And he said, "When you're done, I'm going to tell all these young people in this Christian school that you are wrong. There's nothing wrong with drinking beer as long as you keep it under control." A youth pastor in a Baptist church. I said, "If you do that and one of them dies in an automobile wreck, their blood's going to be on your hands. And by the way, I'm going to tell your pastor he needs to fire you." And do you know that there are things that we preach against, and people say, "Leave it alone, preacher." You preach against pornography. People say, "Leave it alone, preacher. I'm not hurting anybody." While it wraps itself around you, will one day contract and will destroy every bit of decency in your life. As you preach against cigarette smoking, "Preacher, come on, legalist." All I'm trying to do is kill that snake before it kills you. Now, is there any sin that you're allowing to wrap itself around you? You eat the fruit of your own way. So a person cannot be happy because sin ends up not making you happiness, but it makes you bondage and destruction. So we might as well look at our lives and say, okay, I don't maybe have a sin of beer. I don't maybe have a sin of looking at things I shouldn't. What sins do I have? It doesn't matter what sin we allow to creep into our life. It's dangerous. It never leads to good. So if it's pride, if it's disobedience to parents, if it's bad attitude, if it's hate toward a brother or sister, whatever it is, you've got to defeat sin, or it will wrap itself around you and it will defeat you. So what sin are you playing with that you're going to be playing with? Because we all have sin nature. And what do people with a sin nature have a tendency to do? We have a tendency to sin. So we've got to be on top of that thing. All right, now another reason that we cannot be happy if we are Christians and we are in sin is because God will chastise us. All right, let's look at Hebrews 12 real fast. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, 5 through 8. We're talking about why do we want to live for God? Now, the first reason is I love Jesus. But a second reason is I'm afraid to disobey God. Now, when you guys were growing up, and even to this day, you're a little bit afraid to disobey your dad and mom, aren't you? There's going to be bloodshed in the woodshed, right? And that holy fear kind of makes you straighten up sometimes. Now, Hebrews 12, 5 through 8. "Ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto sons. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint without rebuke of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth." All right, now get this, and we'll be quick. I still believe that God judges sin. I mentioned that in Sunday school. And God judges us when we sin. Now, God is not up there, because some of you say, "Well, I've sinned, and God hasn't done anything to me." God's not up there with a baseball bat waiting for us to step out of line to crack us on the head. That's not God. He's the perfect disciplinarian, meaning He knows exactly what to do to shape us. Now, sometimes my mother would just have to look at me and give me a hairy eyeball. And I would shape up. If that didn't work, she'd come down a little harder. She'd say, "Mike." If that didn't work, she'd say, "Michael." And sometimes, of course, she'd call my middle name. Michael Andrew, then I knew I better shape up. I was just this close from death. And if that didn't work, there would be the bloodshed and the woodshed. Now, one time I got a spanking when my dad was alive, and he was trying to go a little easy on me. And when I was done, I went into my bedroom and told my big brother Paul, didn't hurt. Paul, being the good brother he was, he went down and said, hey, Dad, Mike said that didn't hurt. So Dad said, oh, it didn't, huh? He said, come here, Mike, I'll make it hurt. And that one hurt. I got a second spanking. Now, Dad was trying to go easy on me, but then he had to come down harder and then harder until I finally learned my lesson. Now, that is the way God works. He spanks us as hard as He has to, but not harder. First thing He might do is take our joy away. Has anybody in the room ever experienced losing your happiness when you just felt distant from God and you feel like horrible? Don't forget, if you confess it, He forgives it, but if you confess it. And then you got to accept that God forgives you, or else you're going to continue feeling like you're distant from God when it's a lie from the devil. If you get something right with God, God forgives it. Because He said He's faithful to forgive you. And if you feel terrible about it afterwards and you think, man, I'm not right with God, that's a lie from the devil. He's the accuser of the brethren. And how do you fight lies from the devil? With truth from the Bible. And He said if we confess it, He will forgive it every time. Faithful. But if we don't confess it, God comes down a little bit harder. He may put you in an automobile wreck. Not every time you have an automobile wreck is God's judgment. Sometimes it's women drivers. Amen? And then, if that doesn't work, He may bring some financial crisis, but He knows exactly what to do to get our attention. How many remember this fella Dale who said there's pleasure in sin for a season? I'm going to live my season. He lived his season. He went to one of the clubs after we had talked, and he got drunk. And he got mouthy, and he got into a fist fight, and he got beat up pretty badly. And afterwards, 3 guys came to him and said, do you want revenge on that guy who beat you up? He said, yeah, what do we do? And honestly, true story, they took him over to the car, and in the back of their car were 3 rifles. They said, Dale, you get in, and we'll drive over to the house of the guy who beat you up, and at midnight you knock on his door, and you can say, payday, and we'll blow holes in his house. Dale said, that'll get him. So Dale got in the car with him, true story, and he drove over there to the house, and he thought he was going to get revenge. But those 3 guys were actually friends of the guy who beat him up. And they had set him up. And they took him to an abandoned home. And they said, okay, Dale, go up and knock on the door. And when you knock on the door, say payday, we'll blow holes in his house. So Dale gets out, still intoxicated, walks up toward the door. They pull out the rifle, aim him, not at the house, at his back. And pulled the trigger and hit the target, and Dale dropped. That's a true story. Now, God was trying to get a hold of Dale. You know how I know it was God? Because Dale lived. You don't live through 3 rifle holes in your back unless it's God. So my preacher went to visit him and said, Dale, God's trying to get a hold of you. And he talked to him probably something like that. And I wasn't there, but as he said, Dale, can you see this? God's trying to get your attention. Something like that. He was confronting him about God. And you know what? I wasn't there, but I was told Dale's reaction, he just laughed in my preacher's face. He just laughed. Now somebody says, man, if God did that to me, I wouldn't be laughing. We have to ask ourselves a question. Are we laughing some at what God is doing to us? Are we laughing at some of the little things? And if we're fool enough to laugh at those little things that we think are insignificant when God's not thinking insignificant, I wonder if we'd be fool enough to laugh then. So we do need to understand that God is serious too. So God is someone we love, and He loves us. And if we even get chastened, it's not to destroy us. He chastens whom He loves, to teach us. But I still never like getting a spanking from Mom or Dad, and I definitely don't want one from Holy God. So when there's failure in our life, and we just act like God's not going to do anything, that is totally not true. God chastens whom He loves. And so here are the reasons that we want to keep going. I'm going to give you one more, and we're going to quit. All right, number 1, because of Jesus. 2, because of you. And very briefly, Number 3, if for no other reason why I want to live for God, and I keep challenging you about this, and I did last night, but because of them. Because of Jesus, because of you, or for your sake, for our sake, and if for no other reason, for their sake. Now, what do I mean? It's pretty clear. Outside these 4 walls, there still is a world, and really is a world that's dying and going to hell. And, frankly, not too many people care. And somehow we have got to get to where we care. The Bible teaches that hell is not a fairy tale. I preached it last night. Psalm 9:17. The wicked shall be turned into hell. Not might be, but shall be. And all nations that forget God. Romans 6:23. The wages of sin is death. Revelation 20:14. Whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Picture it. Thousands and thousands. And we've got less people going soul winning now than ever before. And you folk are trying. But I'm saying we have less people going into the mission field, less people going into God's work. Why? Because we're not focusing on the thousands that are really in danger. In danger? What do you mean? Really in danger. I'd say hell is really danger. In Dalton, Georgia, I'll close with this because we're out of time. In 1979, another true story, 4 young men went to their favorite swim hole and hadn't been there in a month. And the first teenager dove into the swim hole at that creek. And the second teenager was about to dive in when the head popped up from the first teenager and he screamed, "Go back! Go back!" and got sucked under. Realizing that his friend was in danger, he put his foot into the water, was going to dive in and try to help him. And the head popped up the second time and he screamed again, "Go back!" and got sucked under. One last time he tried to help his friend. I talked to at least 4 people who were in Dalton, Georgia when this happened. They said that's exactly what happened. He went into the water the third time to help his friend, and the head popped up with the final blood-curdling scream, "Go back!" and got sucked under. And this time a pool of blood rose to the surface. They ran to get help. The fire department came. They dug the swim hole, and they found the body of that teenager, and they found what had happened. That young man had dove head first into a nest of water snakes. A couple of snake stories tonight, I know. But it illustrates something. Now, when he got pulled down into that, he knew that he was going to die. But he knew his friend was coming. So he fought them off and stuck his head out, "Go back!" and got sucked under, fought them off again, just enough to warn his buddy not to go to the same place. And when I read that, I got to thinking, what would it be like if I could take a magic saw, just picture it, and with a magic saw, go in front of the groups I get to preach to, and cut a hole like here tonight. A hole in the earth. And cut a hole deep down and deeper until we get to the lid of hell, which I believe to be in the center of the earth. And cut a hole in the lid of hell and open up that pit and reach down and take hold of one man who's been burning in hell for a few thousand years. Put him behind the pulpit and let him preach and me sit down. I imagine we'd hear the most eloquent sermon ever heard in our lives. "Go back! Go back! Don't come here! Go back!" Why does it seem that we are not too concerned about warning the wicked about the dead about hell, until we're looking at them in a casket? Now, I've seen people in a casket, and I've wondered, are they going to heaven? Almost every time I hear somebody's death, I begin immediately thinking in my mind, heaven or hell, heaven or hell, heaven or hell. And when we look at somebody in a casket, it's bad, but it isn't so bad when we know we're going to be in heaven, that they're there. But when we look at someone in a casket, it's too late if they're in their way to hell. They're already there, and there's no way to get them out. And so what we do, and we put our lives into this thing. Why? Because I believe that what I do is truly going to make a difference in somebody going to heaven or hell. So let's bow our heads this evening.